We'll go ahead and get started. So if we can make our way to the seats in the auditorium. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. I know that is this better? There we go. All right. I want to thank everybody for being here tonight. And I know that the weather has not really been cooperating, and there are some other conflicts as well. So I appreciate everybody coming here tonight to listen to what I think will be a terrific forum with a number of candidates. We'll go ahead and start with an invocation. I'm going to turn the floor over to Tom Novellis.
Thank you. In our prayer this evening, those that know Pastor Ernie Sanders with the Geauga County and everything that he does on the radio, he is in emergency right now. He just doesn't feel well, so we just need to keep him in our prayer as well. So if we just open up now. Father God, we just thank you for who you are and that you have taught us liberty through your son Jesus, that's where real liberty is and where it comes from, and that as we look at this land that you have given to us to possess, that you give us the wisdom as we look at candidates and we understand what good governance is. You gave us the rule of law, and you gave us the ability to understand good from evil. And we just thank you that you are the one that guides the hands and gives the wisdom to those that would be in elected office. You put people where you want them for your purposes. Lord, thanks for giving all of the candidates safe journey here. We ask you to guide them in the words that they have to communicate with us, and that you would then give them good journey home. And just thank you for all of those who have come out. We ask you for your blessing on this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right, if you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So as we get underway here, I do want to point out that this is actually a jointly hosted event. My name is Tom Hack, and I'm the Executive Director of the Lake County Liberty Coalition, and we are joint sponsored tonight with the Geauga County Tea Party, and Tom Novellis is the president of that, and we're also lucky enough to have the Vice President of the Geauga County Tea Party here as well. And again, thank you for being here. Before we actually get into the forum, I did want to make a couple of announcements. On April 16th, we will have another candidate forum, more with the local races. We're going to be very fortunate. We'll have Ron Young, who's running for the Lake County Commissioner. We also are going to have the two candidates for the 11th District Court of Appeals. We're going to have the candidates for the 61st House District for Ohio, and a number of other candidates as well, especially for the state GOP Central Committee. So we certainly invite you to that. Again, that's at April 16th, which is a Monday, from 6:30 to 8:30. On Saturday, May 19th, we have the Liberator Conference. You'll be receiving more information on that, but the Liberator Conference is designed to bring people together like who are here, like the members who are here in the audience. We're looking to cross-pollinate ideas and actions, and we're wanting to take our principles and make them more relevant to the local government. And we need to do that because although there are many Tea Party organizations around, what I want to do is really ensure that we maximize our ability to become effective and to, again, turn the needle to the right. I'd also like to mention that on Monday, April 2nd, at Mentor High School in the Paradigm Center, Sarah Fowler is having a forum on education. She'll be talking about House Bill 512, which some of you may be familiar with. That is a major change to how the state of Ohio Board of Education is actually organized. And a number of the a significant amount of their authority is actually proposed to migrate to a cabinet position in the governor's office. And it's something that we all need to be aware of, because it is really going to isolate the voter from what's going on in education in Ohio. She's also going to talk about the state report cards, which just came out, and she's also going to talk about the strategic plan for the State Board of Education. And with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight's forum. We're fortunate enough we have 3 candidates tonight. We're going to, unfortunately, we had advertised that Mary Taylor was going to be here. Unfortunately, due to other circumstances and the weather, she's not going to be able to make it, but we were very fortunate to have her running mate, Nathan Estruth, here to represent the Taylor campaign. And then we also have Mike Gibbons, who's running for Senate, and Melissa Ackinson, who's running for Senate as well. The basic format is that each candidate will have 20 minutes to speak. That will be followed up by 5 minutes of questions. And then after that is complete, we will open the floor to questions from the audience as well. And kicking this off with the gubernatorial portion is Tom Novellis.
Great, thank you. It's easy from Tom to Tom, right? Something I can remember. Nathan, the best way that we figured out to allow all the candidates, instead of going through all the bios and everything like that, is for you to give us the introduction, talk about, and in this case, you have the opportunity to talk about yourself as well as Mary. So we're looking forward to that, and we'll give you 20 minutes, and then we have some questions for you.
Very good.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks to all of you for being here, caring enough to come out on a rainy night and be with us on this Holy Week. Mary does send her regards. The plan was for us both to be here, but with the president's visit, she was down there with the president and had to move some things this afternoon. So when he called her out this afternoon, I'm glad she was there. So I will try and do my best to cover for both of us. My name is Nathan Estruth. E as in Edward, S as in Sam, Truth as in to tell the truth. And I introduced myself that way before I started running for office. I've never run for office before. I just stepped away from the private sector, from Procter & Gamble after 27 years of growing businesses there and hiring folks for the last 4 years, specifically in the city of Hamilton, down by Cincinnati. My wife and I live in Sharonville, Ohio, just north of Cincinnati. We've been married for 25 years, and we'll be 26 this May. We have 4 children, from 15 to 21 years old. Our 2 15-year-olds, our third was twins. Girl-boy twins are at Mars Hill Academy, which is a classical and Christian school in Mason, Ohio, about 10 minutes from where we live. Our daughter, who's 19, our eldest daughter, is up at Hillsdale College in Michigan. So if you know anything about Hillsdale, you know that says a lot about who she is and maybe a little bit about who we are as parents. We're proud of her for choosing that school. And for those of you who don't know, Hillsdale is one of the few colleges in the country that refuses to take any government funding of any kind, not only for the school, but also for their students. No federal loans, no state loans, no government-backed money or subsidies of any kind. And then our eldest is Daniel. Daniel's 21. He's at home with us. Daniel has profound cerebral palsy and will remain at home with us. Daniel has been a joy to our family, and he was diagnosed with a massive brain hemorrhage in utero at 32 weeks gestation. My wife Madonna and I were both working for Procter & Gamble at that time. We worked in China for 3 years, from 95 to 98, selling American products and bar soap and shampoo in China. And that was discovered at Queen Mary Hospital in Hong Kong, and it was recommended that he wouldn't survive, and the doctors asked us to terminate the pregnancy. And we just said, is it a boy or a girl? And we named him and started praying. And by God's grace, he not only survived birth, but is still with us today. And I will just say that Daniel has taught me a lot of things, but probably first and foremost is a deeper and greater sense of God's compassion. He's nonverbal, but he's got the best sense of humor in our whole family. So he keeps us laughing, and we're all better people because of our son. I never had plans to run for office. I've never run for office before. Mary Taylor called and said, I want you to consider running for lieutenant governor on my ticket. And I literally said, you must be half a cup of crazy, Mary. I bring no name ID. There's got to be lots of other people that are better. And she basically said, Lo, I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for a conservative like me, and I'm looking for someone to step out of the private sector that understands the challenges of growing businesses in Ohio, and specifically manufacturing businesses in Ohio at this point in time. And I said, well, on the manufacturing side, I've been doing that for the last 4 years for P&G, running a startup manufacturing firm in the city of Hamilton called Influx. I've hired over 150 plastics processors and machinists and welders and electrical engineers. It's both a tool and die shop, and we do software to help injection molders mold more efficiently. And so I've had a little experience on that, and I wasn't planning on leaving that, actually. It was my team, and I loved it, but honestly, as my wife and I started to pray through this decision, we realized that our number was being called, and we needed to step in as we looked at the dynamics of this race. On the conservative side, I'll just mention a couple things. Even though I've never been a candidate, so you don't really have a record to look at, what you can look at is what my wife and I have engaged in over the years. As a younger man, when I was in college, I had the privilege to intern in the Ronald Reagan's last summer of his '88 White House. So in the summer of '88, I was in the Office of Public Liaison working for Ronald Reagan. In '86, I interned on Capitol Hill for Congressman Eldon Rudd, one of the strongest conservatives in the House of Representatives at the time. He was from my hometown of Scottsdale, Arizona. And I worked for Jack Kemp when he was at Housing and Urban Development. And Jack Kemp sent me to Ohio in 1990 to work for a guy named Ken Blackwell. And so Ken and Rosa remain dear friends to this day. And it's not without coincidence that Ken Blackwell, as well as the other two Ohio NRA members, have endorsed the Taylor Estruth ticket. But after working for Ken in 1990, I got a job inside P&G, met my bride, and 27 years later, here we are. I've also had the privilege along the way, while working at Procter & Gamble, to engage in both the political realm and the public square via a role that I played on the board of the Alliance Defending Freedom. And if you know ADF, used to be called the Alliance Defense Fund, but the Alliance Defending Freedom is the largest global Christian legal organization in the world, defending religious freedom, free speech, life, and family. And ADF really is a fantastic resource. And in the battle, they just argued the Supreme Court case on this past Tuesday, trying to defend a crisis pregnancy center from California against the egregious coerced government speech of California, saying that all crisis pregnancy centers in California have to have big posters on the outside of their buildings referring to abortion clinics in 13 languages. And so that's one of many things that ADF does, but by God's grace, they've won 52 U.S. Supreme Court victories over the years. And it was a great privilege for me to serve on that board. So the way I like to say it is, I've been in this battle, I just switched seats. I've never been a candidate for office, but I decided it was time, because as I saw the things that I was frustrated with, what I saw in our state, what I saw in our country, and what's happening, I liken it in some ways to a definition that I like of the word insanity, which is to continue to do the same things again and again and expect a different result. And honestly, in my mind, when we continue to put forward and nominate and try and elect career politicians that have liberal records, that run in a Republican primary as a conservative, and hope that they will be different if we vote for them, that's truly the definition of insanity to me. And when I looked at this race, I said, really, there's two choices, Mary Taylor or Mike DeWine. And so I want to practice a little grace and truth here, and I'm just going to talk about the records, all right? This race has gotten pretty nasty in the last couple weeks with the DeWine team going up statewide and calling Mary Taylor names and slandering her personally and the like. So we're trying to stick to the record. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my investigation of who Mary Taylor is as well, because I had to step away from a career that I wasn't intended to step away from, because I needed to know. She wanted to make sure I was a conservative. I needed to make sure she's a conservative. Okay? So first I want to just talk about Mike DeWine, and I'll talk about Mary, our vision, and then we'll turn to questions. Okay? So Mike DeWine, as our U.S. Senator from Ohio, voted not once, not twice, but 3 times for amnesty for illegal immigrants. Partnered with Hillary Clinton, and had his spokesperson go out and brag that he had helped fashion that legislation with Hillary Clinton. Mike DeWine voted to spend taxpayer dollars for tuition for illegal immigrants. Taxpayer dollars for Social Security for illegal immigrants when he was our U.S. Senator. He also, at the same time, he was busy. He partnered with Chuck Schumer to undermine our Second Amendment freedoms, so much so that he earned an F- from the NRA. You have to work hard for an F-, folks. Okay? And Mike DeWine did. And as I study the Constitution, I actually look at the number one role of a U.S. Senator actually is to serve as a check and a balance on the judiciary and the executive branches. If you're in the U.S. House, you don't get to do that. You don't get to confirm judges, but in the U.S. Senate you do. It's a sacred responsibility of a U.S. Senator to defend and protect the Constitution by the people that they confirm or reject as well. And on that measure, Mike DeWine also got a failing grade. Mike DeWine led the Gang of 14, along with John McCain, Olympia Snowe, Susan Collins, and Democrats, to undermine the 10 most conservative judges that George W. Bush put up. 10 mini Neil Gorsuches, wiped out by U.S. Senator Mike DeWine because of his leadership in the Gang of 14. Mike DeWine now says, when he got asked the question on the trail when I laid this out in Butler County, someone says, well, what about that vote? He says, that young lieutenant governor candidate doesn't know what he's talking about. That was a conservative move. And I sent that audio tape to U.S. Senator Mike Lee, who, if you know Mike Lee, he's the strongest constitutional conservative in the U.S. Senate. He founded the Tea Party caucus in the U.S. Senate. He has a 100% rating for the American Conservative Union. He called, and he's endorsed Mary Taylor for governor because he said Mike DeWine has forgotten. He's been there so long, he's forgotten. This was no conservative move. This undermined conservatives. But just in case you're in doubt, let's look who he did vote for judges. Anyone here of Sonia Sotomayor? Yeah. Great underminer of constitutional freedoms, now on the Supreme Court because Barack Obama put her there. When Bill Clinton nominated Sonia Sotomayor, Mike DeWine voted yes with the Democrats to make sure she got on the federal bench. Even that arch-conservative, my tongue's in my cheek, even that arch-conservative Mitch McConnell at the time voted no. Mike DeWine was yes, Mitch McConnell was no, as were most other Republicans. Anyone here of Merrick Garland? Merrick Garland, right? Barack Obama's nominee off the D.C. Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court. Thankfully, the Republican Senate held the line. President Trump is elected, and we have Neil Gorsuch. Thankfully. And thanks to all the work that I know many of you did to make sure that President Trump was elected so we could have Neil Gorsuch. But when Merrick Garland was first nominated to the federal bench by Bill Clinton, Mitch McConnell, no, he's too liberal. Mike DeWine, yes. And just in case you're in doubt, ever hear of a guy named Eric Holder? Yeah. Yeah, Mike DeWine voted yes for Eric Holder as well, folks, when he was nominated by Bill Clinton to be Deputy Attorney General. And so when Mike DeWine trots out and says he's 100% pro-life, strongest defender of the Second Amendment, we just need to remember the record and remind folks who Mike DeWine really is. And then there's a little bit of a storyline out there as I've gotten into this race of, but once he came back from the swamp, once he came back to Ohio, he's remembered his conservative roots. Well, let's look at that. just for a second. Mike DeWine, as Attorney General, mandated that all Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles issue driver's licenses to illegals in Ohio. Check the record. As Attorney General. Okay? Mike DeWine took all of our facial photographs out of the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and dumped them, every single Ohioan with a driver's license, into the criminal database with no public awareness. Again, no respect for the Constitution, no respect for privacy, right? You want to talk about, the Fourth Amendment? Let's talk about it, Mike DeWine, right? No public awareness, no audits. Your photographs in the criminal database with access given to 37,000 state employees. 37,000. Where this has been done in other states, it's limited to less than a dozen. Okay? So that's who we have as Mike DeWine, Attorney General. So I look at that and say, hasn't really changed unless he's running in a Republican primary. Right? So when you look at that, thank you, I then say, all right, it's clear I've got a liberal on one side. So I went back and I did my homework on Mary's record. And on Mary Taylor's record, when she was first elected to the State House in the 2002 election, right, she served in the State House for 4 years, 2 terms. She was the only woman to sign on to the bill to ban abortion, no exceptions. It wasn't allowed on the floor of the State House because the Speaker of the House, John Husted, blocked it. She was the one who said, as a freshman legislature, I ran as a conservative, I ran as a Republican. You want me to vote for a tax increase from a Republican governor, Bob Taft, when the leadership came knocking on her door saying you need to vote yes? She voted no, and they kicked her off the Finance Committee, even though she's a CPA, for doing so. When my wife and I look for elected officials to support and candidates to support, they're folks that are willing to stand on their principles, even when it means they get punished in the political realm, even when it means their careers aren't advanced, because it's not about the career, it's about what you stand for. She got kicked off the Finance Committee, she still stood strong. She co-sponsored the concealed carry law in the State House, and she helped override a Republican governor's veto. So I look at those things in 4 years in the State House, and I say, all right, I like what I see. Then, as state auditor, she gets national award, guardian of the Treasury, pinches pennies better than anyone else, only accountant to be elected statewide to auditor in Ohio. She's also the only Republican standing who rings the alarm bell when Ted Strickland, Governor Strickland, is barreling towards an $8 billion deficit. And then there's Kasich. I said, Mary, I love the record. Tell me about John Kasich. You're his LG, Mary. Her simple answer was, Nathan, as my wife and I interviewed her, Nathan, John Kasich left me. John Kasich left conservatives. I'm still the conservative I've always been. And then she told me a few stories. But first, let's look at the record. When she was first elected, she asked to run the insurance department, which she did for 6.5 years, because she wanted to stop Obamacare's biggest hits on Ohioans, starting with building out the state exchange. She did the actuarial analysis and convinced the governor that it would implode in 4 to 5 years, and we absolutely should not waste our money building out a state exchange. Now, I was working in healthcare at the time, and I will tell you the conventional wisdom, even amongst free market economists, was build the state exchange, because that's the only place you can have innovation away from the federal government. But Mary said it's going to collapse anyway. Why should we bother? She saved us over $40 million by winning that battle with the governor. But as she won that battle, those around the governor, who we all have seen the influence, slowly started to sideline her as the conservative voice at the table. So she lost more than she won. She opposed internally the Medicaid expansion. But she also said, Nathan, I'm a constitutional conservative, and the Constitution of Ohio has one job for the lieutenant governor, and only one: heartbeat away. That's it. It says, no statutory authority. Her secretary is owned by John Kasich's budget. I said, Mary, you're not convincing me to run for lieutenant governor. But at the end of the day, thank you, It's not honestly about me, it's about having conservative governance in this state. And so I looked at that and I said, all right, Mary, ever since you've been running for governor, you've clearly differentiated where you were inside. You've said no to the severance taxes on oil and gas that the governor insisted on bringing. She said no to Common Core. John Husted brought it to Ohio. John Kasich implemented it. Mary Taylor, as your governor, will end it. And by the way, she'll also veto 512 if it comes her way as governor. We're the only camp on either side that's willing to say 512 has to go down. Send her the heartbeat bill, she'll sign it. Mary Taylor is clear on her positions. They're the same positions she's always held. Oh, and by the way, not only is she clearly the most conservative, especially when you combine Mary Taylor and Nathan Estruth, the most conservative ticket. Remember that 2006 election I mentioned when she got elected to state auditor? Every candidate on the Republican ballot, bad year for conservatives and Republicans nationally, everyone lost, except one, Mary Taylor, all the way down ballot, running for state auditor, the only Republican left standing in a blue wave year. She outpolled liberal Senator Mike DeWine way up ballot by 175,000 votes, running first time statewide. Why? Because Mary Taylor's made tough. She's an accountant. She's a mom. Families can identify with Mary. Her conservative policies, when articulated, are appealing to the electorate, and it's the only chance we have to beat a Richard Cordray or Dennis Kucinich in November, is to have a conservative on the ballot who will champion those issues and explain where they're the right issues for Ohio families. So my request to you is, please join us in this. I've never done this before. If you have some feedback for me afterwards, I'll take it. But at the end of the day, I've been doing this for 10 weeks with Mary. And I know her heart as we talk these issues. We are eye to eye. We are bringing conservative governance back to Ohio, and we need your help to do it. Time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I don't know what questions I have for you now. No.
Fire away.
Actually, we're going to take questions from the audience after everybody speaks, and then we'll set that up. So some of the things we're going to go through real quick were definitely state constitutional questions, and you covered some of them very well. But relative to the health care, many don't understand what the sitting governor has already done in expanding Medicaid. We see that many don't need it and are receiving it. And with that, there's no recognizable positive impact on the system whatsoever. So with that, the question simply is, will Mary, as a governor, take and reverse what Kasich has been doing with Medicaid expansion?
She will, and further. So Mary has been very clear since she's run for governor. She will end the Medicaid expansion. There's two key reasons why. One is it is financially unsustainable for the state. This was a bait and switch from the federal government from the beginning, right? When you run the numbers, the state can't sustain it. But more importantly, it's not what's right for people, okay? So there's three additional things beyond ending the Medicaid expansion that Mary and I talk consistently. One, we will embrace the new policies coming down from the Trump administration for Medicaid to work. There will be a work requirement with any Medicaid in the state of Ohio with Mary Taylor as governor. Two, we will work with the legislature to do everything possible to end marriage penalties within Medicaid. You want to talk about poverty, you want to talk about $20+ trillion spent on poverty over the last 5 decades in America, right? We still have the same or worse. We've exacerbated the issue with government. We've created the wrong incentives. The key metric for whether someone is in poverty or not is whether they live in a home with a mother and a father or not. And if they don't, it's much more likely they're in poverty, okay? And third, drug requirements, drug testing. The number one challenge as a businessman, someone who's talked to hundreds now, probably thousands of business leaders, started in Harrison, Ohio on the Indiana border this morning with 30 of them, okay? The number one challenge to grow my business is finding qualified people who can pass a drug test. Why is it that we give them a Medicaid handout and say you can stay addicted on welfare or you can fight to get clean and to get a job? You've got to even the playing field. So we'd pull back on the Medicaid expansion, absolutely. We'd reverse it, and we'd bring Medicaid to work in the marriage penalty and drug testing.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep.
That's a very strong commentary on, what needs to be done in that regard. You already mentioned on HB 512. So why wouldn't Mary want to have control of that in the governor's office? That's a very interesting opportunity. I mean, we see the ping pong from 1953 when it shifted into Ohio and gave us a Board of Education. So why wouldn't she want to ping pong back?
So, simple answer is Mary Taylor and Nathan Estruth truly are small government conservatives, and that includes pushing control of education back down to families and local school districts. And that has to start with ripping Common Core out by the roots. You're asking about 512. I was with the state rep yesterday who summarized it this way. House Bill 512 is Common Core on steroids, okay? It is an additional consolidation of power in the governor's office, okay? Mary Taylor says, I'm not the right one to decide that for families. It's local school districts. We know that the more you grab government in and pull government in as the solution, the more problems we have. I'd put it this way. It's back to that career politician. I'm 50 years old, and this is also why you won't have Mike DeWine take a stand on 512, okay? I'm 50 years old. I was 9 years old when Mike DeWine was first elected to public office. Mike DeWine and John Husted, 60 years on the public dole. 60, almost zero private sector experience. Mary Taylor and Nathan Estruth, 40 years of private sector experience. Why do I tell you that in answer to this question? When you have been on the public dole for 60 years, you actually think that government solves problems. You actually think that consolidating it in the governor's office is the way to fix it because I know better. Okay? Mary Taylor and I will bring a distrust of government, small government solutions, enabling the private sector, enabling local communities. That's why.
Excellent. Now, specific to the role that you're standing up here for as
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor, well said on you have no responsibilities whatsoever except to be the number 2 person there in waiting, if you will. But at the same time, according to the ORCs and that, you do have the opportunity based on how the governor would appoint you as a department head to various one or more departments.
Yes.
So within that role and responsibility, have you had the opportunity as of yet to see the Mercatus Center report?
I have talked to folks about it. I haven't read the whole thing yet.
The report, fully came out.
Yes.
And as it shows, for a lot of you may not have had that opportunity on that report.
Number
but
47, is that what it is?
Yes, yeah. Actually, the state of Ohio, out of 22 states, and this is a report from the George Mason University, it says that out of the 22 states that they've worked with and putting all these numbers together on who had the most regulations, the only state that has more regulations than the state of Ohio is the state of New York. So with that, how are you and Mary looking at or will look with, and in your position as Lieutenant Governor, in the departments that you would be appointed to, how would you look at drawing down those numbers, especially in those various industries that as a business person, we need to increase our business opportunities in the state of Ohio? And what has regulation done from the industries you've been in? And then again, the primary question, how will you as a team work with the legislature to ensure that we're competitive nationally and internationally based on reducing regulations?
So, great question. Thank you. I've taken a lot of questions. No one's ever given me that one, so I do appreciate it. There's actually 2 questions I'm going to answer in there. One was, what's my relationship and partnership really with Mary as governor and me as LG, right? And then 2, there was this regulatory question. So I'm going to tackle them both, all right? Before I said yes, I said, Mary, what do you want me to do? Especially after hearing her description of the LG relative to Kasich, right? So, what are you looking for, Mary? Are you just looking for a check-the-box business guy or not, right? And her answer was this. She says, I want a partnership. Said, I've been here for 7 years without one. I would never do that to anyone, okay? And I will say that she has been absolutely true to her word on that partnership from even before my wife and I agreed to step in. She's listened to my advice and my counsel. And so the number one thing I would be, and Mary says this, so I wish she was here to say it. Sorry again for the last minute changes with the president. But she says, Nathan's my COO to her CEO. And the role that she's asked me to play is one that leads a jobs council and an advancement of the common sense issues regulatory work that she's done that's been limited in scope because it's been tied by the executive, right, to all of state government's agencies. So basically it's working within the regulatory, tax, and business community to create a much more jobs-friendly Ohio. So that's the role that she said, you know, as COO, one, working hand in hand with her on all the major policy priorities. It's much more of key advisor and lieutenant, if you will, true lieutenant, in terms of honestly making sure that we've got the right advice and the right advisors and, quite frankly, state model legislation from other states around that. And I'll give you another example on that in just a second, again, to show partnership. But two, that I would then take that from a regulatory view, coming right out of business and really challenging each and every regulation on the books. Not unlike Mary's been doing with common sense issues, but taking it broadly across state government. Okay, common sense initiative. I'll give you one other example on state model legislation and why it's so important that we stay connected with this. And it's come up between Mary and I on the trail in the last week, and she's already doubled down on it. In fact, it went up in some ads that we just started running today. And that is sanctuary cities. And she has consistently said her first budget will use the power of the purse to shut down sanctuary cities in Ohio. And she'll work with the state legislature to make sure that the budget that she receives says if you don't follow all state and federal laws, you don't get a penny from the state of Ohio. Okay? And that's good and that's strong and it should have been done long ago. Okay? But I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, hey, the Fifth Circuit just ruled on a law in Texas that takes that concept and doubles down on it. And it says, by the way, we'll add criminal and fiscal fines to any elected official in Ohio who doesn't follow state and federal laws. So you make it personal. So we just went up on air with that today. That's now the policy. It's a great example, too, of partnership between Mary and Nathan as we hear things in other states that we need to bring to Ohio.
Excellent, thank you. And we'll have you sit down, we'll ask more questions when we're all finished with our other candidates. And
Thank you.
Melissa?
Yes.
Ackinson? We're delighted to have you with us today. Tom?
Better give me that microphone. Hey guys, I'm Melissa Ackinson. For those of you who don't know me, I'll give you a quick rundown. As you see, I have my two sons with me, but between my husband and I, we have 4 boys, ages 22, 20, 8, and 1. So we're very busy people. One of my sons is currently serving in the United States military. He was actually stationed in Kuwait, and then my husband and I received a call last week, and it came from a number in Washington. I heard my husband pick up the phone, and I heard him say, okay, so what do you mean we won't be able to talk to you again? So when are you going to call again? So what we found during that telephone call is our son was sent further north on assignment. He is currently off the grid, and quite frankly, we have absolutely no idea where he is right now. And I don't tell you that as a political talking point. I tell you that because I never want you to forget what families sacrifice to make sure that we preserve this great and most cherished and blessed nation. I grew up on the west side of Columbus. For those of you that don't know, it's a very blue-collar area. You may remember the General Motors plant. It was one of the biggest manufacturing facilities of its kind, and most of our parents either worked for General Motors or they worked for the big aviation plants. So you may remember the Rockwells of the world, the McDonnell Douglases of the world. So my dad was literally a UAW factory worker. He was a Republican, but he was a UAW factory worker, and it was his job to build the parts for the warbirds. The B-1 bomber was one of the most proudest things that the man had ever worked on. And where most kids went to Kings Island and Cedar Point, we spent our weekends going to air shows. And he would show us, you know, hey, this is something that I worked on. And at the time, I didn't appreciate it because I was a little kid. But now as an adult, and he's been gone for quite some time, I get really the significance and the pride that he had as someone who worked in manufacturing back in the day when we had those jobs. So I was the middle child of 3 girls. I am not formally educated. That just wasn't even something that was discussed in our home. My grandparents were both illiterate, and then my parents were really, really hitting it big time just to be able to have solid jobs and to be able to work. And so no one really ever discussed with me a college pathway. So as early as 17 years old, I actually met with my principal. I met with my guidance counselor, and I said, listen, I have no intention of going to college. It was just not something I was even prepared for. But what I would like to do is utilize a homeschooling alternative. I only needed 2 credits to graduate, and I'd like to get a work permit so I can work 40 hours a week. So that's really how I started my career in human resources. It was not an existent program at the school that I went to, and I really had to lobby with the guidance counselor and with the principal. And my principal just said, you know, something like this would work for Melissa. You know, this would just work for her. So we were able to get that approved. So I started working for a large international organization. It was the largest supply chain company of its kind. The name of the organization was Excel Logistics, and we were based out of the UK, but we were headquartered in Westerville, Ohio. And that's when I began my career in human resources. I was effectively able to take assignments, work my way up, and then ultimately becoming a very young executive, and I was highly sought out by other international organizations who hired me. So specifically what I did in the private sector is I worked on mergers, we worked on acquisitions, I was a union contract negotiator, and it was essentially my job to assess human capability, and then from that point I had to determine who stays and who goes, and how do we drive people for results, not only for the shareholder, but for the customer, and to make sure that we were preserving our employees' jobs. So many times when I would show up, and I had all the Ohio Valley and I had all the Great Lakes, so I could be anywhere from Queens, New York one day, clear to West Virginia the next. But when I showed up, it was to meet with employees and to look at top leadership and determine, do we have the right pieces and the right leadership in place? And if not, who do I need to take out of their role? And many people would ask me, don't you feel bad about doing that? You come in and you create these organizations, or you're taking leadership out and people are losing their jobs, or these top leaders are losing their jobs. Do you feel bad about it? And I said, no, it's absolutely my pleasure to take somebody out who's limiting the capabilities of our employees. And quite frankly, that's how I feel about top leadership in the United States Senate currently. We can start with Sherrod Brown as one. Sherrod Brown, and I say this almost every speech because it is fact, Sherrod Brown is nothing more than a political pimp and pusher of hype, propaganda, inescapable government dependency, and lies. Sherrod Brown has pretended his entire life to be everything that I am. Sherrod Brown's tagline is friend to the middle class. I'm a middle-class woman, Sherrod Brown, and you ain't my friend. In fact, all of the policies that you have championed have been an extreme detriment to either the manufacturing organizations that I worked for, or they have been a detriment to my family's health care. You worked incredibly hard to support Barack Obama and to support him with demilitarization efforts and weakening our position on the world stage. Sherrod Brown is a true threat to the sovereignty of this nation. He is not a Democrat. He is a radical leftist. Don't ever be confused about that a day in your life. In fact, at one point, he was selected as Hillary Clinton's running mate. I don't know how many of you are aware of that or not, but those are the facts. What I will tell you is this. It is a very personal mission for me to take Senator Brown out, more so than any man who seeks your vote. The story of my life are the political talking points of every gentleman who will say to you, I want your vote. If you want to know what it feels like as a woman who lived through Obamacare with a child who has a disability, as well as me being born with one of the rarest diseases known to man, I can tell you what that felt like. I know what it felt like. I lived through the $3.3 billion co-ops, all funded by the taxpayer, that went bankrupt, clear through to the high price, high deductible insurance that I could not use anywhere. I paid the high deductibles, I paid the high premiums, I did everything right, yet my child laid in a bed for a month sick No one would help us. You know what he had? A very rare blood infection where he was ultimately enlisted into Children's Hospital, and then he had a major surgery. We went week after week after week trying to get referrals, trying to get people to help us. And I kept looking at my husband saying, I don't understand how this is America. We've done all the right things. We have followed the rules. We come from patriotic families. We didn't have formal educations. We had successful careers in the private sector. We started our own business, and the government implements a socialized healthcare plan that threatened our very existence. There's something wrong in this country. Now, while the Democrats worked on this and they passed it, the Republicans stood down and they allowed it to happen to all of us. That's really the journey and how I began into the political realm. I woke up one morning and I had had a very detailed dream. I told my husband, I said, Rich, we were in the White House. I'm telling you right now, I dreamt it. I was talking to the president. I was telling him everything that we had lived through, from all of our healthcare coverage issues. It was as clear as I'm standing here talking to you right now. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. It was so surreal that my husband and I thought that people were playing a joke on us. Hi, this is the White House. Is this Mrs. Ackinson? Yes, it is. We understand that you've put documents together. You've been working with Senator Portman's office. You lived the nightmare that is Obamacare, da, 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 da. And I said, really, Nathan, I know that this is you and your buddies. Like, who, is somebody pulling a prank on me at this point? It didn't seem real. And the woman on the other line said, no, we're getting ready to send you security clearances. We would like to invite you to come to Washington. You have been able to effectively articulate what a socialized medicine plan has done to your family, and we need you here. Well, at that particular point in time, I was literally getting ready to jump on a plane because we had saved to go to Florida. It was for my 39th birthday, and it was also for my wedding anniversary. So my husband had been planning for quite some time, and I said, listen, I'm very sorry. I want to be able to help you, but I'm taking my nephew with me. We're going to Florida, and he's saved his money to go on this trip, and we're not a family that has the extra money to just go out and buy new plane tickets. I will do whatever I have to do from afar, but I'm not going to be able to go with you. We understand, Mrs. Ackinson, we're sorry that you couldn't participate. And my husband's like, well, lightning doesn't strike twice. Let's just go ahead, get on a plane. We're going to go to Florida. We get to Florida in 2 days into our vacation, and the phone rings again. Mrs. Ackinson, this is Vice President Pence's secretary. My name is Sarah. We really need you to come here to Washington. We need you here for a healthcare listening session, and the Vice President would like you here as his guest to participate. And I looked at my husband and I said, okay, we're going to Washington. I spent my 39th birthday and our wedding anniversary sitting across from Vice President Pence, Kellyanne Conway, members of the cabinet, and I was articulating what happened to my life. And it didn't feel like the Twilight Zone until Vice President Pence says, uh-oh, we've got a surprise, Melissa, turn around. And the president starts singing happy birthday. It was my 39th birthday. And I just looked at my husband and I said, is this really happening? Most people would be excited about that and they would feel honored by that. And don't get me wrong, I did. But the fact that my life had spun into this situation where I'm sitting in the White House on my anniversary and 39th birthday just seemed absolutely surreal to me. And the vice president, his secretary, walks up to me and she said, I told you it wasn't a prank phone call. When we walked away that day, I told my husband, I said, the vice president and the president's doing everything they can to make sure the House and the Senate will act on behalf of the people. Certainly, we will see some meaningful legislation out of this. We heard in the previous administration by Mitch McConnell, from the Paul Ryans of the world, from members of the House, members of the Senate, if only we controlled the House, if only we controlled the Senate, if only we had a Republican president. Yet we had all of those things on a silver platter, and we still continued to see intentional gridlock in Washington. We had a Republican president, pen in hand. How many times did the man have to say it? It just wasn't the Republican president that they wanted. When we left that day, the Ohio Republican Party was in love with Melissa Ackinson like you couldn't imagine. Here was this articulate middle-class woman that they could parade on television. We're going to have her show up to all of our events, and we are going to politicize the heck out of this because she lived through real suffrage. They loved me at that time. I did all of their interviews for them. I went to all of their events, and one night I got a telephone call, and they said, Melissa Ackinson, Vice President Pence is going to be in town. We would love for you to be a guest and to come to this event. Okay, sounds good to me. I'll come. But you know what I did? I prepared a 16-page document, and I walked the floors all night long to the point that people actually thought I was running for political office. I sat next to Congressman Warren Davidson that night, and I looked at him, and he said, "Are you running for office?" I said, "No. I'm not running for office. I have a 16-page document that I want to give you. It's going to detail my life in the private sector, my life as a small business owner. It's going to talk about as early as 2012 when I started meeting with state legislators questioning our TANF policy, because guess what? When I had my staffing business, I couldn't get anybody to work for me. I couldn't get them to increase their hours for fear of losing a multitude of entitlements. And I literally prepared a 16-page document, page by page, talking about my life. Talked about what it was like when I was a landlord and I had people who were living in my rental properties. Everybody was on EBT. Everybody was receiving some level of entitlement. It was absolutely insane. I turned in documentation to Ohio Jobs and Family Services with case studies saying, people are selling their EBT cards online. These are my tenants. Do you understand this is happening? And do you know what the investigators said back to me? We are aware that this is going on, but quite frankly, it seems we're always hiring more caseworkers and social workers. We just aren't hiring enough people to actually manage and make sure that these people still need these services. So I'm watching different things play out in my life, and these are federal level policies that are allowing this to occur. We have every fix in the world to actually make appropriate legislation. We just don't have the strength in Washington to stand by our president to make this happen. That night after I walked the floors of the Republican convention, I went to church the next morning. My feet were so swollen that I wore slippers to church. I got home, my phone rang, it was Washington again. Melissa Ackinson, President Trump would like you to get on a plane within the next couple of hours. We need you in Washington again. You are going to be on live TV. We want to make sure that you are there when he makes a plea to the House, a plea to the Senate for them to finally act on health care. And I got off the phone and my husband's like, how does this happen? How did you know you were going back? I knew it from the very beginning when we left the first time that we would be relied upon again. I got my entire family together. We flew back to Washington. I was asked by his administration the very first time that they met me. They said, where were you trained? Do you have formal training? I said, I went to Columbus Public Schools. I don't have any formal education or training. Communication, did you have a communications degree? And I said, no. But they selected me as a surrogate for the cause where I was able to articulate what happened. When I left President Trump that day, in my mind, I really believed, you know what? I've lived through so many failures, regulatory and compliance issues. I've lived through the healthcare nightmare. I'm now looking at my business, figuring out with my husband, well, do we continue to use subcontractors and stifle the amount of employees that we have? Because if so, we're going to have to adhere to more government regulation. And it was just a very stressful time. But I believed in my mind that they were going to act and do the right thing. I was on live TV when they presented the brainchild of Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan of the skinny repeal. And I knew at that very time that I had legislators in Washington that did not have the interests of the people at heart. And quite frankly, I believe that we will continuously see the gridlock that we see in Washington until we get appropriate strength to get behind our president. Now, here's my story about running, and I'm just going to tell you some facts. I don't care if feelings get hurt, because I think as the voters, I think you need to understand and you need to really, really get a grip and a grasp on who's actually running in this race. When I came home from Washington, I looked at the men who wanted to go up against Senator Brown. And while I want you to fall in love with me naturally, I really do, I'm going to use statistical, anecdotal evidence, and I'm also going to give you a history lesson. In 2012, Ohio was one of the most United States Senate races ran, okay? Between Josh Mandel, between Sherrod Brown. One of the most expensive. In total spending with outside dollars, $84.5 million was spent. The Republicans outspent the Democrats 6-1. We walked away with a loss. We were not able to obtain the necessary votes from the critical communities that, quite frankly, desperately need conservative fiscal Republican leadership. We did not send somebody to go up against Brown who would shut him down. Now, who do you believe Senator Brown is going to fear more? Will it be a mother who can effectively articulate the terrible policies that he has imposed on my family, many of them in some of the most fascist of ways, things that didn't work for the American people, things that hurt my health care, things that hurt my children? You put my son in a situation to where you wanted to demilitarize us at every turn. You know absolutely nothing, Sherrod Brown, about manufacturing and distribution. I was a union contract negotiator. I think I know a little bit about that. In fact, I was so good at my job that a union that had been around since the 60s went to the National Labor Relations Board and they decertified their own union. I was 24 years old at the time. Relationships are incredibly important. I do not have to tell you that the political climate has radically changed in a way that we never thought that we would see. I know I didn't in my lifetime. I stood by President Trump from the very beginning. I'm featured in a book called The New American Revolution. Do you know what it's about? It's about the average citizen who stood up and aggressively fought back and created this populist movement that you're seeing across the country where people are running because we want control of our republic again. What's happening right now is not working for our people. If you believe for a minute that there is not a radical, leftist, globalist agenda coming for us, I'm here to tell you, it absolutely is. Every man that seeks your vote is going to talk to you about educational reform, but here's the thing. Melissa, 5'2", the only person that actually went down when we were all invited to meet with the Ohio Education Association. That is the radical Democratic arm of the teachers union. I specifically went down there. Sherrod Brown also showed up. And I said, I know that you're not going to endorse me, but I'm just asking you to hear me out. I would like to take my own life and show you that where utilization of alternative school systems yielded me an outstanding life where I was able to be successful in the private sector and then where I was able to create jobs. When we look at each county, it was my job in the private sector to understand the job and labor market. Where we are deficient are our skills trade. Our apprenticeship programs are gone. Our life skills programs are gone. Our trade schools and vocational schools are depleting. But I understand that at a very intimate level. There's a lot of people that are going to tell you they are conservative running in this race. Jim Renacci is being branded as the golden boy of the Ohio Republican Party. How can anybody who's rated a D with Freedom Works truly be a conservative? How have we gotten to this point in our republic? I am asking you to get behind me in this race. I am asking you to get somebody who will actually take Sherrod Brown out once and for all. There's a lot of things I can say to Brown that Mr. Gibbons cannot say, that Jim Renacci cannot say. You need a verbal assassin to take him out. God bless and keep each and every one of you. God bless the great state of Ohio. And most importantly, God bless America. Thank you.
Right. Melissa, thank you very much.
Yes.
I think what we're going to do is we'll have Mike Gibbons speak next, and then we'll have 3 questions, and we'll alternate who goes first on the questions. Great. Mr. Gibbons?
I'm Mike Gibbons. I'm running for the U.S. Senate, and I'm not a woman. I want to tell you, today is Vietnam Veterans Day, and it's also Holy Thursday. Do we have any Vietnam veterans here? Today is Vietnam Veterans Day. Would you stand up? I think we owe these people a round of applause. Thank you. As I said, I'm Mike Gibbons. I'm running for the U.S. Senate. And the first thing you need to know about me is I am not a politician. I've never run for office before. I'm a businessman and I'm a conservative. And for the last 25 years, I've been throwing things at my television set. And usually there's some Washington career politician on the screen. And what's happened in the last few months is just made my decision to join this race even more important to me. This country is in serious trouble. We have career politicians. We have a guy named Sherrod Brown who's representing this state. He's the guy that votes with Elizabeth Warren 95% of the time. Sherrod Brown, and you Vietnam vets will know what I'm going to say here. Sherrod Brown studied Russian studies at Yale University. He learned the Russian language, and he spent his honeymoon in Moscow. This man is our U.S. Senator. If you wonder why he votes the way he does, I've given you the answer. This guy still wants that Marxist-Leninism that he went and visited in Moscow. We need to get rid of career politicians. Sherrod Brown has been in office for 44 straight years. He has never spent one day in the private sector, yet he attempts to make laws for all of us without having been exposed to anything that we go through. So when I joined this race, the newspapers announced it, and they said, wealthy Cleveland businessman. And if you knew where I started and how I got to where I am, you would be as insulted as I am in being called that. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I was born on West 77th Street, and we made it big. We moved to Parma. And my dad was a high school teacher and a wrestling coach. And his summer jobs were waterproofing houses. My grandfather was president of Local 310. And that's the laborers union in Cleveland. And I might add, talk about beating Sherrod Brown. I grew up with labor people. And they're not going to endorse me. But I will tell you this, they're going to vote for me. They know me. I went to St. Ignatius High School. I graduated from there. I played football, but it wasn't nearly as good a football program as it is now. And went on from there to Kenyon College and got degrees in political science and economics. Went there on a full scholarship. I was lucky enough then to earn a full scholarship to business school. And I can tell you this, I didn't even know what business was really until I went to that business school. And I was able to get an internship at an investment banking firm. I can talk about this a little more clearly here because you're from my area. I'm from Cuyahoga. I live in Fairview Park, and I'm from Cuyahoga County. But I got an internship with a company called McDonald & Company. And I found something that first of all, I liked, and I did well. Spent some time learning my trade, and 28 years ago, I started a company called Brown, Gibbons, Lang. Brown, Gibbons, Lang is a middle market investment banking firm, and it is now, and I can say this because it was a recent industry survey, one of the 4 most recognized names in the United States in middle market investment banking. It's given me the opportunity to do this, what I'm doing now. You know, I've been giving speeches all over the state now for 6 or 8 months. And I drive probably on an average of 3 hours in each whatever direction I'm going in. And I have this idea that when I get there and get finished with what I'm doing, I need to reward myself. So I've gone to many county fairs, hog roasts. I'm like the hog roast king. I ended up in Minster, Ohio at an Oktoberfest about 6 months ago. And I think that little story of being in Minster, Ohio kind of crystallized everything about what's wrong with America and what we face. I reward myself usually with a funnel cake. I try to find the worst thing I could possibly eat. And I was there with a woman named Amy who goes out and helps me with my campaign on a regular basis. And as I said, I've never run for office before. I'm not as politically adept as Amy is. And I sat down with my funnel cake. I remember it was pumpkin with cream cheese drizzle. And I was eating my funnel cake, as happy as ever. And all of a sudden, a couple sat down next to us, elderly couple. And Amy jumped up and said, "This is Mike Gibbons. He's running for the U.S. Senate." And I kind of swallowed what I had in my mouth. And she said, "Are you a Republican or a Democrat?" I said, "I'm a Republican." I said, a problem with that? And she said, well, I'm not voting for you. I said, well, why not? I'm a good guy. Talk to me, and maybe you'll like me, maybe you will vote for me. She said, no way, I'm not voting for you. I said, well, what's the problem? Why are you generalizing? All Republicans aren't bad people. She said, I believe that the government should take care of us from cradle to grave. And I will tell you, the only thing I say is you probably shouldn't vote for me, because I'm not going to help with that. So everybody talks about their Trump credentials, and I'll get to that. But you probably wonder why at this stage of my life I'd be running for office. And I think anybody that runs for the first time always tells that story, Nathan and Melissa. And it really comes down to one of my kids. I've got 5 kids and 5 grandkids. And my second youngest son graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in aerospace engineering with honors. And if you know anything about Georgia Tech, he had a lot of options. And about a month ago, a little more than a month ago, he was winged as a naval aviator. And in fact, his future in-laws are here tonight. Along with sitting with my wife. And my wife, I've got to introduce her because she goes to 95% of what I do, and I couldn't do this without her. It's my wife, Diane. So early in his training, he was down in Pensacola, Florida, and Diane and I flew down to visit with him. And I walked in, and it was one of those life experiences. I was so proud of this kid. I couldn't believe it. And, you know, I was thinking about it the whole time he was there. In fact, he said, Dad, quit saying you're proud of me. I said, all right, Ryan. But anyway, on the way home, I said, you know, what Ryan's doing had an effect on me. Here's a guy that started out in Parma, Ohio. He got to where I am. And I've really never done anything for this country like Ryan has. And maybe it's time I do that. So, I had been involved in the Trump campaign. I was co-chair of his state fundraising activity. I gave him the largest personal donation I've ever given to a candidate. And I raised a bunch of money for him. So I met a bunch of people on his campaign, and those people ended up on his transition team. And I went to Washington to interview to give back. And I interviewed in 3 departments: HHS, the Small Business Administration, and the Department of Commerce. And HHS was an interesting story, and I think you'll appreciate it. I sat down around this table with about 6 or 8 very stern-faced people. He said, Mike, how'd you like to be budget director of HHS and have a $1.2 trillion budget? And I said, I don't think so. In fact, if the truth be known, I don't even think this agency should exist. So this was a very short interview. I was out of there, went over to the SBA, met with Linda McMahon, and I was offered a job ultimately as head of the Office of Advocacy. It turned out to be kind of a speech-making job about SBA programs. I wanted to get in to and eliminate some of this bloated bureaucracy that we had, and that wasn't going to let me do it. So I ended up going on over to talk to Wilbur Ross. I'm an investment banker, as I said, and I've known Wilbur Ross for a long time. And he knew who I was. And ultimately, make a long story short, I ended up as one of the 3 finalists for Deputy Secretary of Commerce. So in the meetings that led up to a Senate confirmation hearing, I found it was impossible to do what they wanted me to do with my personal business, my personal life, prior to that Senate confirmation hearing. I came home, talked to Diane, was talking to my friends, and they said, Mike, if you really want to do something, run against Sherrod Brown and beat him. We did a bunch of polling, and I'm an outsider, and I'm blunt, and I tell the truth, and I'm not afraid to tell it to anybody. And it is going to take an outsider to beat Sherrod Brown. I started in this race running against Josh Mandel, and the only reason I got in, and I had supported Josh Mandel, there's not a lot of air between Josh Mandel's positions and mine. We're both very conservative, and that wasn't the problem. It was whether or not he could beat Sherrod Brown, and that is how I end up in this race. So I told you I was blunt, and this is really where I stand. I think that the government is too big, too powerful, and too intrusive. And if we do not cut spending, we're going to be in serious trouble. And we have to cut spending, even if we have to fight with the Washington wing of our own party. I think that business creates jobs, not government. And they create a lot more jobs when taxes are low. And people do a lot better, families do a lot better, they take home more of their paycheck. If we want to grow this country, and we're going to have to grow this country, the economy of this country, because there's no other way to pay back the $21 trillion national debt we have. We are going to have to grow it at a higher rate than we're growing it now, and certainly higher than the 1.9% we grew at during the Obama administration. The only way to do that is let businesses go free. Free up regulations and stop taxing people that employ other people at the rates we're doing. Now, we've taken one step. We've lowered the taxes on big companies. But what we've done is we've created a lower tax rate for big companies, and small companies that employ over half this country are paying a good 14% more. That doesn't work. That's going to be job number one. Our healthcare system is a shambles. We are paying twice as much as the industrialized world for healthcare. Why? In my mind, the government. The government should not, you've read the Constitution, of all people. Healthcare isn't mentioned in there. We've got to get the government out of healthcare. And I've spent a lot of time, I'm a numbers guy. I believe we can take the government out of healthcare. I want them out at the payment level. Once they make payments for our seniors, for our disabled, for people with pre-existing conditions they're going to have to give assistance to, for people that truly can't afford health care, they're out. I want to make insurance companies compete for that, and our cost of insurance will go down. Our cost of insurance, though, only represents 12% of our health care costs. What I want to do is put the healthcare providers in competition. They're not in competition. The government picks winners and losers. When you go to the Cleveland Clinic and you need an MRI, you have no idea what it's going to cost until you pay your co-payment when you get home. I want to have complete transparency. You're going to know exactly what it costs when you go in there. And then you're going to be able to use a lower cost provider. And I predict, and I'm certain about this, that there will be a lot of new businesses cropping up if they know they can compete with the big guys on price. As long as they're the same quality, you should be rewarded for using that lower cost provider. And your costs will come down. Your health insurance costs will come down. There is no other way to lower medical health care costs if we don't get the government out. The only thing the government does when they get involved in something is raise the price, and it will bankrupt this country. I am pro-life without exception. My mother was adopted. It is not even something I would consider talking about. I believe that if you want peace, you prepare for war. And for the last 8 years under Obama, we have not prepared. I don't believe that anybody that comes to this country illegally should ever have a path to citizenship. We have an opiate crisis that is devastating our state in a lot of this country. And I have to tell you a little story about that. Because 4 years ago, and I'm an investment banker, and I started a business. But I started another business, an addiction clinic, and it's right in Bainbridge Township. We're using a completely new methodology. We're achieving tremendous success, and I did it with my own money. I have to get out of that before this election is over. And we're making our way to do that. But the innovation we used to get where we are is almost impossible to do with the FDA doing what they do with new ideas and new innovation. It has to be changed. So this election had, actually this primary has 5 candidates. And if you paid any attention to the polling, there's really 2 candidates with the resources that are going to end up facing off for this election. And one of them is Jim Renacci, and one of them is Mike Gibbons. And unfortunately, it takes a lot of resources to win a U.S. Senate primary in Ohio. There's 88 counties. And those are the only 2 candidates with the resources to get it done. Jim Renacci is a 4-term sitting congressman. And believe it or not, I just found out before he was a congressman, he was a lobbyist. I've signed a term limit pledge, and I've also stated that I will limit any political office holder getting out of their office from going into lobbying for at least 5 years. So I'm sure he's not going to agree with that. But I think it comes down to a really simple decision. You can vote for a conservative, Mike Gibbons, or you can vote for a conservative that's only a conservative when it's convenient, and that's Jim Renacci. And I can tell you a few things that might indicate, because I like facts. Jim Renacci was one of 42 Republicans, only 42 Republicans, that voted for the Obama transgender bill. Jim Renacci caucuses with the Tuesday Morning Group. I think somebody had mentioned Olympia Snowe, Susan Collins. Those are the congressional equivalents of Olympia Snowe and Susan Collins. Not only does he caucus with them, but they contributed to his campaign. His grades with Heritage, with Eagle Forum, are in the 50s and 60s. The man is not a conservative. So, it's a simple decision, conservative or no conservative. And I'm going to need your support. I'm going to need you doing anything you possibly can to get through Jim Renacci. And if you want a conservative in Washington, you're going to have to do that. Now, you can be angry, and I'm angry, and that's why I'm running. But when you get to Washington, you actually have to be able to do something. I've spent my life negotiating with business owners and families that own businesses all over the world. I had to convince them that my ideas and my ability to make a transaction happen, that I could personally do that and nobody else could. I've done that my whole life. I've done it successfully. It's given me the opportunity to do this now. You need to be able to get there and show something more than anger and actually have the knowledge and the capability to get those rest of the senators to listen to your ideas and sell them to them. If you can't sell your ideas, you're ineffective, which, by the way, is what Jim Renacci said when he was running for governor. He said he was an ineffective legislator, and he no longer wanted to be part of a legislative body, and therefore he's running for governor. And then a guy named Mitch McConnell recruited Jim Renacci. Now, I'm not really upset about that, because the minute Mitch McConnell recruited Jim Renacci and talked Donald Trump into patting him on the back and say, hey, Jim's my boy, he also said, we don't need another Rand Paul in the Senate. Well, I can tell you, the next day, Rand Paul endorsed my campaign. So he will be coming here, and if you go to gibbonsforohio.com, you'll know when Rand's coming. I don't know if we can get him to Cleveland, but I know he's coming to Cincinnati. So this is going to be a tough race. And I need you to take yard signs. I need you to help any way you can. Tell your friends. I'm the conservative in this race that can win. And I will beat Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown is a leftist, and none of the things that he's committed to have ever worked in human history. And I happen to know that history. I've studied economics, I've taught economics. Socialism doesn't work. We're going to talk about that when I debate Sherrod Brown. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Gibbons, Mrs. Ackinson, thank you very much for your speeches tonight.